Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Would you please rise and face to the right for the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And we are at an action item, approval of the agenda. I'd entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the agenda as given.
All right, thank you, John. Any discussion? I do have one item I'd like to remove. Oh, no, that's not this part. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Unmute to say aye. Okay.
Aye.
Craig is aye.
Thank you. Okay, now we are at public comments on agenda items. We have one letter from a community member, which I will not read because it has reference to one of our employees, which is a personnel issue. We also have a letter from our previous school board representative, Spencer Pruitt. A very nice letter, and I hope you all have that and you've read it. He just graduated and he is on to Pacific Lutheran University. Our student school board member, Aliyah, she is not here tonight because she's taking her finals at Olympic College. So now we are at board member comments. Does anybody have a comment?
Are you calling on us or just wanted to?
Go ahead, Leanna.
Okay. Well, the graduation was a pleasant surprise. I did not expect it to be a bad time, but it exceeded what I thought would happen. And it was a beautiful day, windy even, but it was still pretty. And all the students that came up and jumped across the stage into their adulthood, it brought me to tears the whole time. And a lot of the students, I want to call them kids, but a lot of the students I knew, and I got to give Spencer his sleeve, and I didn't stop crying after that at all. So it was a wonderful, wonderful time, and good job to the district, everybody that put their time and effort into that. Absolutely great. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanna. John, did you have something? Unmute, John.
Okay, yeah, I just want to agree with Leanna. I thought it was innovative, and I really appreciate the teachers who put so much effort and thought into the occasion. I just thought it was clearly our attempt to say something that honored our graduates in a difficult time. To do that, we have a situation where the ceremony has been taken out of much of life. And I think that our attempt to put some celebration and dignity back in was really appreciated by the people that was there. And I thought it was very well done.
Thanks, John. Art, do you have any?
Would agree with everyone else who thought it was a wonderful experience. I did have one fun one. My supervisor who lives and works in the district, his daughter, who I've known since she was in 4th grade, she graduated and she was ready. She was really ready. She marched across the stage and the whole thing, and she was so excited. She didn't even listen to me as I told her best wishes and everything else. And of course, her dad shouted, "Hi, Art," in the car, and that sort of stuff as they're going by. And anyway, he then asked her afterwards, "What did Art say?" And she could not remember because she wasn't paying attention because she was so excited. Enough said.
No, he's on his phone. Okay, Craig?
I would just like to take this opportunity, especially with the close of the school year, just to kind of reaffirm my appreciation to the everyone at this district for kind of getting through these last few months. I can't even begin to comprehend the planning and organization that took place just to be able to, day one, which was it March 16th or so, to ensure meals were getting home, and we would start some form of remote learning, and really learning as you go, and taking a dynamic situation, make the best of it, and finding out what's not working and making quick corrections. And it all from top to bottom. It seemed to, you know, it wasn't painless, but from some other friends that I have that are school board members, as well as just friends that were parents around the area, it really seems like to me, and maybe I'm just biased, that North Mason seemed to be cutting edge and miles ahead of other districts with regards to trying to minimize impact. I mean, there was obviously impact, but just to trying to do the best we could. I can't think of a district who has managed to do what we have done, especially with the limited resources and the geography that makes, you know, getting into the far reaches of the district difficult at best sometimes. So we have our challenges ahead of us, but just, I mean, going from where we started to, you know, basically having to reinvent how we provide services was amazing.
Thanks, Craig. And I do echo what our other board members have said. And I also want to add and ask you, Dana, if you will make sure that the bus drivers and the food service workers know how much they are appreciated. And we know the hard work that they put in all this time. And it was not an easy task, and they stepped up and got it done. And as far as our teachers and their Zoom meetings, especially with kindergartners, it has been quite a ride. And I think, like Craig said, everybody stepped up and made it work. And the graduation was absolutely fun. It was just fun. I kind of want to do it that way every year. Just have a great big parade and students walking by. It was really, it was memorable. I'm sure they will never forget it either. But Dana, if you could pass that on to the high school administration and teaching staff too. They did an excellent job. Excellent. Okay, so now we are at the consent items and the consent agenda. And I would ask that we remove one item from the consent agenda, and that's under E. And it's number 1, policy 2004, accountability goals. I have a problem with this policy, and I'd like Dana to speak to it as well.
I would move that we accept the consent agenda with the removal of policy 2004, accountability goals.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, we do have a problem as a district with this policy as well. It is listed in our bulletin from WASDA as an essential policy, which is why it will come back to the board at some point in time. But we have contacted WASDA and OSPI and asked them to get together on this policy again. It is in response to recent legislation, and I believe in the last session. However, our focus as a state, let alone as a district, on meeting the needs of all students in their time in our schools, on focusing on social and emotional learning and building multi-tiered levels of supports to get kids the skills that they need to be successful in life, is not recognized or is not part of the goal setting piece that is in this current version of this policy. And therefore it's contrary to what we want to do as a district, what we believe is best for kids, and even what OSPI is putting out there as best for kids. So we've asked, are they doing an updated version before we go ahead and adopt this when we don't feel very comfortable with what it asks us to do?
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of that particular policy. Is there any other discussion?
Yeah, I do have a question. Is the ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that's a federal act, that's not state, correct?
Yeah, that is a federal act, but what we have to do as a state in response to the act was determined by our legislature. So we're believing there will be some changes there. For example, this version of the policy is very dependent on making all of our goal setting as a district about how students do on the state assessments. And while assessments are an important measure of how successful students are, they aren't the only measure. And we've worked hard to ensure that we look at all sorts of different ways of seeing if our students are being successful. In addition, the state is in the process of considering changing the assessment tool that they use to report on our statewide success to the Federal Department of Education from the current test that we use in grades 3, 8, and 10 to dependent on the NAEP test, which is done in a very different way. It's not given to every student in the state at each grade level. The NAEP we currently participate in fact, Belfair has been lucky enough to be chosen each of the last 3 years, but it picks some random groups of students across the state at each grade level and random students within a grade level at a building to take the NAEP assessment as a dipstick measure of the success of how the state is doing. And the NAEP is an assessment that compares us on an international level rather than our current state assessment. So with OSPI in the process of potentially moving to that assessment, it seems like it would be prudent of us to wait until they make any adjustments to assessments before we adopt new policy language that requires us by 2027 to have goals based on current assessments.
Which groups would not be eligible to be assessed? I see there in like section 2, with regards to like 90% of students eligible to be assessed, or graduation rate for all students in each of the groups required by ESEA. Who's not captured in that group?
Well, currently, I mean, currently the way that we do the assessments, not very many people, it's pretty much everybody. So 90% is pretty much 90%. But if the state changes to the NAEP assessment, there may be years when nobody in North Mason takes the NAEP, but students around the state take the NAEP. There may be years when we're really heavy on kids who are taking the NAEP. And so it's a very different assessment system. So they would have to change the language significantly if that is what gets put into place in the coming year.
Okay. Thank you.
Art,
Yes.
did you have something?
Yes. If we approve the consent agenda without the policy 2004, does that mean in this case that we're simply not going to deal with it? Or are we going to deal with it separately and maybe approve it separately?
What I would recommend is that we table it for now. We get some further guidance from WASDA and OSPI. And then if it is really essential that it be adopted in its current form, that we bring it back at a subsequent board meeting. But if there are going to be adjustments, that we wait and bring it back when those have been done.
That answer your question?
Partially. We probably should formally state that somehow in the motion, that not only is it not being pulled away, but that we're going to table it, as opposed to just leaving it go. Typically and historically, when we have something that's pulled off, it's pulled off for discussion and voting on. So I just want to be clear about that. And then finally, a comment. I would be very much in favor of pulling this off and postponing it, tabling it. I, for one, do not like any kind of test that tries to compare districts or schools to each other, because no tests that I have run across, and I've got a testing background, are designed to do that. They're designed to test kids, not designed to test schools. Thanks.
Thanks, Art. I think I will restate the motion to be all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, tabling policy 2004 accountability goals. Signify by saying aye, unmute yourself and say aye.
Laura, can we do roll call votes for all the votes just to ensure?
Okay, let's do that. Leanna,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Art,
I'm a little unclear. Are we voting on the entire consent agenda right now? Or
yes.
just, because I still have some
Possible.
additional comments I would like to have addressed.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, I would, if it's possible, if the superintendent could very briefly, looking at policy 3131 and explain the resident displacement thing. I did get an email from some staff saying that that there isn't displacement. A resident does not get displaced by having say a teacher who lives out of the district student come in. But the language was confusing to me. Can you comment on that?
Right, the language is confusing. Again, it's recommended language by WASDA, but our practice is that our resident students do not get displaced. If we take transfers from out of district, the first group that we look at are teachers or, any employees' children. But we do not displace our current kids in the case that we were super, super full and didn't have space to take out of district transfers, then we would not say to someone who lives in North Mason, you have to go to school in South Kitsap. We don't have room for you, for example, so that we can take someone from without of the district. This does not allow us to do that.
Thanks. Next one would be 3424, the opioid related reversal thing. Just briefly, I've taken lots of opioids when I've had surgery. And of course, I'm so scared of them that I get off of them as fast as I can. But what exactly is this all about for schools?
Yeah, this is required by the work that the legislature did last session, that this be in place when school starts in the fall, that every high school in the state have dosages of Narcan or one of those shots that you can give somebody who's going into an overdose reaction to opioids at the school to turn around what's happening and try to save their lives.
Okay, thanks. And then last one was 3413 on immunizations. I was looking to see if there was any coronavirus stuff in there, and there's not. And I guess it would be worth saying, if that is appropriate, that it's really too soon to fit coronavirus into this policy, but at some point that would need to happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. When we have it, when we have an immunization, I'm sure we will get a new adoption to the policy.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions concerning the consent agenda? We have an aye from Leanna and an aye from John. Art?
Aye.
And Craig?
Aye.
And I vote aye, so it passes. All right, moving on. Number 3 is the superintendent's contract. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thanks, Craig. Is there any discussion? All in favor of approving the superintendent's contract as presented for 2021? Leanna?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Art?
Aye.
Craig?
Aye.
And I vote aye. The contract is approved. And next we have the 2021 preliminary budget presentation. Go for it.
Okay, so normally this is where you'd see this big old PowerPoint and we'd have all these slides explaining what our revenue should be next year and what our expenditures are going to look like. Unfortunately, the coronavirus has sort of thrown a little kink in that, seeing as how we're still determining what next year is going to look like. Therefore, the financial plans on how the money is going to be spent next year or what money we're going to be receiving has not been solidified yet. So what we are looking at is about a $3 million revenue reduction over what we had this year. So about anywhere from $31 million to $32 million gross overall. And aside from that, that's sort of where we're sitting right now. We did get notified that we're going to be getting some CARES Act funding, some ESSER funding from the federal government that could potentially be upwards of $491,000, although we were just recently told that they're taking 20% of it off the top right now. Hopefully we'll get it back at some point, but we'll see. They're giving it to us in the form of a federal grant though, which means that I have to submit for reimbursable costs on a monthly basis in order to access the funds, which sort of lengthens the timeline of being able to get the money and also requires for us to spend our money first before we get the money from the federal government. So that process will actually start next month. I'm working on the budget this weekend. Hopefully we'll have something more solidified here by the end of the month as we determine what, or work towards determining what next school year is going to look like. Aside from that though, budget related, I am going to have to come to the board next month during the board meeting requesting a budget extension for the transportation vehicle fund. That's because of the accident, the one of our buses being hit at the beginning of the school year. Insurance company paid out for a new bus. That bus is getting delivered, but in order to make payment on that bus, I have to extend our budget there. We'll go over budget. So you're going to see that one. It's going to be an in and an out. You'll see an insurance recovery, and then you'll see the expenditure for the bus. Second one is going to be for the general fund. We tried to build the budget to not have to come back for a budget extension on the general fund. Unfortunately, we didn't know COVID was going to happen. And now with us getting access to the CARE Act funds, in order to spend it, we have to have capacity in the budget to spend it. And we don't have capacity in the budget to spend it because we didn't know we were going to be getting the money. So I have to give us capacity in the budget of about $500,000 in order for us to access the funds starting next month. So you're going to see both of those come before you next month as well, on top of what you're normally used to as a more formal preliminary budget presentation. The budget needs to be before the public by July 10th. And so then you'll get the presentation showing preliminarily what we're looking at, and then it will be finalized during the month of July, and we'll present on the final budget during August. Do you guys have any questions sort of where we're at with the budget process right now, or why we're not further?
No. Are we having, will there be a public forum then in the August board meeting for the budget?
Prior to budget adoption? Yeah, there would have to be.
In August.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Thanks,
And
Beth.
hopefully by that time, the OPMA rules will be more back to normal, and we would be able to have the public participate in a more natural way in board meetings.
Hopefully. Okay, thank you. Next is our Washington State School Directors Association Legislative Representative nomination. Who had this before? Who was our last legislative rep?
I was, Craig.
Okay, so is anybody interested in this position?
And just for information, I will not be seeking for the position again.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Leanna?
I'm interested, and the legislative representative and at South Kitsap, she does some, she's WASDA, I forgot her title for them, but I talked to her a little bit to be a little more comfortable, because I don't even know what that looks like, but I would love to have an opportunity to do it. So
Okay. So I'm going to need a nomination.
I nominate myself.
Okay.
I'll second.
Can you hear me? I nominate Leanna.
Okay. All in favor? Leanna?
Hi.
Aye.
John? Art?
Aye.
Craig?
Aye.
Aye, and I vote aye. So congratulations, Leanna. I'm sure you'll represent us well.
Thank you.
We are at
Sure,
board development and linkage, the superintendent update.
Okay, we're going to start going back to Ashley with the budget status report, and then I will have a teaching and learning update.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll start with our other funds. Capital projects as of the end of May is currently at 1.2 million. You can see that our capital projects fund is finally starting to wind down. We have multiple projects that are in the process of being completed currently. We have the softball field, which is close to being completed, the stadium scoreboard, and the roof at Sand Hill was completed. So that's been done. And Dan, I'm forgetting one. Which other one do we have? The softball field, stadium, roof. Oh, and the portable for the early kindergarten. So the portable is currently on site. We're waiting for some final inspections from the county before we can put the skirting on, and getting it hooked up to the sewer system. That should be done this summer though. So the portable will be up and operational by the fall. Debt service fund, we're currently well, as of the end of May, we were at 2.2 million. We made about $1.2 million in debt service payments though on June 1st. So you're going to see that drop come the report for the month of June. ASB, we're currently sitting at about 423,000. There's not much activity going on at ASB right now at all. I'm sure you could probably have guessed that. Transportation Vehicle Fund, we're currently at 176,000. Our new bus should be delivered next month or late this month, and we'll be making payment on that, and that fund will drop to about 35,000, and then we'll get our depreciation payment in the month of August. We were informed by OSPI today. They did originally anticipate having to shortchange our June apportionment payment for transportation. We've been informed that they're going to be making full payment for the transportation apportionment, so that's a positive note. For enrollment, there's nothing new to report. They're still using the same figure that they have been since the closure, so they're basing our apportionment based on February enrollment, and that has remained the same. So we should be good to go to general fund now, if you want to bring that one up. Okay, so
Hey, Ashley, real quick on the enrollment.
uh-huh.
How have we measured the enrollment? I see that numbers are pretty consistent, but there's differences in those numbers. How have we measured those and tracked those?
We I don't want to say that the state gave us a more favorable number, but for the month of June, it technically was more favorable than what we would normally see. During the month of June, our numbers do tend to dip quite a bit more than the fractional 0.9 that they ended up dropping here. So we were probably about 3 to 4 over what we would normally expect to see for the month of June. But overall, using February as sort of a baseline was actually a positive move for our district. I know some other districts didn't necessarily fare as well, but it's because of some additional programs that they were running where it was harder on their enrollment count. So, but we ended up faring pretty decently once everything was corrected from the original get-go.
Nice.
Okay, so we'll start with our revenues. If you want to scroll back up one, there you go. Okay, so revenues year to date, we're trending right about where we would have expected to be at this point of the year. Our local sources, you can see that we're a bit over where we would have anticipated being this year. Oddly enough, when Mason County put out the extension for property taxes, they opted not to go with the blanket extension, which was actually more favorable for our district. We did have, we received a decent chunk of our property taxes in the month of April, which is when they would have originally been due. But in the month of May, we ended up receiving about $500,000 more in property taxes. Normally during that month, we trended about $300,000. So that additional $200,000 is we would have normally expected to see in April. June is when the individuals who did apply for an extension, June is when it expires. So we should see the rest of the property tax collection during the month of June, which will be the last of our property tax collection that we should be seeing hit our accounts. Our state sources year to date, we're tracking about 0.6% under, which is basically spot on. And our federal sources were under about 6% at this point. You're going to see that that spread sort of increase when I do this budget extension because of the $500,000 capacity that I'm going to need to add for the CARES Act funding. Our state forest number, which is sort of like my surprise number that I like to see increase significantly. We didn't see that this year. A couple of years ago, we ended up with $1 million in state forest revenue. This year, we're trending at about 50,000. I know some of that's getting tied up in a lawsuit right now, so we may see that in the future. Can you go on to expenditures now? Okay, so expenditures. This is one of the areas that our entire budget is technically based on. So up there in that green semicircle, that 6.27 number, if you'll remember here a few months ago, we were in the 3% range. So as a district, we're doing a really good job increasing that number. All expenditures are being scrutinized prior to going out the door, which has allowed us to raise it quite a bit. The goal is to get that to 8% by the end of August. And if you'll remember, the July and August apportionment payments are our two largest apportionment payments of the year now, since the legislators sort of swapped how they pay us. So that should help rectify that deficit there. Our total expenditures year to date, we're tracking literally right on budget. Technically, at this point of this year, we'd be at 75.96. We're currently at 75.88. Salaries and benefits are trending under, but again, that's because of the last minute move to decrease some of our positions going into this school year. That decision was made in August after our budget had already been completed. And our basic education actual year to date is currently trending under. Once again, that's due to the decrease in the salaries and benefits for the year. Do you guys have any questions regarding high level expenditures or revenues from the other slide?
I don't.
Okay. Okay, so we can move on to some more details. So this is basically where we've been trending for our fund balance. You can see that the solid blue is this year. This is not a happy line, and it hasn't been a happy line all year. The dotted lines are the prior 3 years above. That green triangle on the far right side, that's where I'm trying to get our fund balance to by August 31st. So that's the goal. And any spending that's being done is with that goal in mind. So currently right now, this is taking all of our historical spending and stating that if everything were done like it was in previous years, we'd be ending with a $2.16 million fund balance. Well, we're definitely not doing things like we've done in previous years. So we'll see what happens with that. The only thing that may end up impacting that this year is the need for massive quantities of PPE to be purchased before the start of next school year. Unfortunately, the PPE prices are absurd. Things that we could normally have gotten for $3 prior to COVID coming about, such as an 8-ounce bottle of hand sanitizer, is now going for $12.99.
Good heavens.
Yeah, so myself and a few other employees have been on a personal task force of finding PPE at rock bottom prices, even if that means placing 60 orders because we can only order 6 bottles at a time. So we're stocking up at lower prices and getting that stuff ready for the upcoming school year. Okay, next.
Just real
Deanna?
quick, Ashley. In addition, we want to note that we are participating with numerous districts around the state in a cooperative hosted by ESD 112 out of Vancouver to be able to purchase masks and other PPE for the fall in huge bulk quantities to save and bring those costs down. And what you won't see right now is Ashley and I found early on in the COVID crisis an opportunity to apply for a FEMA funds to help pay for some of these expenses. Our district was awarded a FEMA grant, but what that means is when we have expenses that may qualify in this area, we have to do them and then submit them to see if they will be reimbursed. And Ashley and her team are working really hard to make sure all these things we purchase, cleaning supplies, masks, etc., to try thermometers, to do our best to be able to get reimbursed by FEMA from those, so that whereas one point in our budget, that's going to show like a really huge expense, hopefully we will balance that out with some reimbursements a little later on.
Okay.
Yeah, and that FEMA process is just like anything with the federal government, is a lengthy process. So luckily we jumped on that right when it came out. So we're quite a bit further than some other districts. We're actually to the point of being able to submit expenses. It's just pulling all of the support, getting it all over to we basically have a case manager that works with us on that. And then he'll look at our package and then send it up the chain, and we'll determine how much we're getting reimbursed. A lot of the times they do require what they consider like a 25% local match. So basically they'll reimburse us 75% of the expense. And then we take on the burden of the other 25%. In that situation, 75% is much better than nothing. So we will definitely take it. Okay, so going into more detail on the general fund summary, the local tax line, you can see the amount that had been paid at this point last year, which is in this first box. We were currently at 97.97%. This year we're at 96.6%. So in all reality, we're about 1.3% under where we had trended the year prior as far as total balance paid. But again, I feel that that's due to that extension that was granted. And with that extension coming due at the end of this month, I think that we're going to see that even out here quite soon. Other than that, for right now, you can see that we are trending with a positive revenues to expenditure balance. Our total revenues collected year to date is $26,785,162. And our expenditures are about $605,000 less than that. So we are operating with a positive balance. Now the goal, as written in the budget, was to operate with an $800,000 positive balance to add to our fund balance that we started with at the beginning of the year, which was just over $2 million. Next. Okay, so this one you're gonna have to expand, but this is one of my favorite ones that I can put together because it really does go into more detail as to the specific programs where we're bringing in more revenue and where we're actually spending more, where we're seeing a deficit, because it shows where the needs are within the district. So you can see with local property tax, we're about 70,000 under. That's not super significant. If you'll remember, after the October collection, we were over $300,000 under collected at that time. So we're starting to sort of even that out at this point. Other than that, the biggest number that you're going to see on the revenue side, we're about $252,000 under collected on the federal grants. So when you put the budget amounts for the federal grants into the budget at the beginning of the year, you're putting in the full amounts. Then during the year, you start claiming portions of that. So because we haven't claimed all of the federal grants yet, you're going to see that number as a negative. The goal is, as we get closer to the end of the year, you start seeing that you'll never see it in the black, but you get it as close to zero as possible. Whatever's left there carries over to the next year. We only have one federal grant right now that doesn't have a carryover provision. So for expenditures, you can see that under the 01, that's normally where our general apportionment comes into. So we're almost a positive $1 million there. So that's literally the state revenue that's technically not earmarked for anything specific. So that $1 million right there is being used to offset all of the red that you see below. All of the red are state and federal mandated programs. So you can see that what we're spending in order to operate those programs and be compliant in those areas, such as Title I or ELL, highly capable, all of that, it's costing more than what we're actually getting from the state and federal government. Now, when you basically take our overage under state apportionment and offset those costs, we're still underfunded in those areas by about $331,000. And then on the other financing uses line, that's our transfers for our non-voted debt. So I just had to do another transfer. You guys approved that transfer in May in order to pay our loans for the energy conversion and for the stadium. So do you guys have any questions regarding any of the information presented?
I do, actually. This is Craig.
Okay.
And by all means, whether it's you or Dana answers this, when we talk about like the $331,000 that were underfunded from state and federal mandates, in context of fully funding schools, is that 331 accurate, or would that number be actually larger that we're underfunded with?
Does that
make
so
sense?
if you were, yeah, it does. It does. If you were going to take my opinion,
Right,
it
sure.
technically would be larger.
Okay.
Now, the thing is that because I know that I only have a specific pot of money in Title I, which is the line item that you see that starts with a 51 that says like disadvantaged federal.
Oh,
I know
yep.
I only have a certain I know I only have a certain pot of money there. Okay.
Mhm.
So when I look at where to place an expense, how to code it, which is where we end up getting these ones, I know I can only push that threshold so far before I have to find another funding source for that expense, which that funding source ends up being 0100 because it's basic ed and it takes on anything else that we can't find other ways to pay. Now, as we move into a year without local levy, the local levy helped offset a lot of these expenses, and we won't have that. And so we'll have to get creative with the 0100 basic ed piece in order to help fund these.
And Dan, I kind of piggyback off that, if you don't mind. When we're lacking local funding and unsure, I just saw today that they're looking at north of $8 billion of revenue shortfall for the next 3 years in the state. What's our liability when if they decide to pull back on state funding, which I'm assuming could be on the table?
Yeah.
What's the district's liability when we just can't provide the services? We literally won't have the money.
Well, we just had a recent analysis done by the finance office at OSPI of based on the McCleary decision and the different pots of money that we get that are labeled as part of that 0100 basic ed dollars in a district, how much of that falls under the definition of, what is the word, Ashley? The things that they have to.
Yeah, the basic education requirements.
The definition of basic ed, and how much of it is outside of that. And so of those dollars we receive that would fall into basic ed dollars for our state, the analysis that we got from the OSPI's office was that there was about $60,000 that our district receives from the state that does not currently fall under the that does not currently fall under the definition of basic ed. So outside of the things that we've traditionally funded with levy dollars, the loss that we would see unless they change the definition of basic ed when the legislature next meet would probably not be much beyond that $60,000 of state funding. Correct, Ashley?
Yes. The only things that we technically had on the list that they're now stating potentially is not part of basic ed is our fire district payments. We receive a couple $1,000s a year that we then turn around and simply pass through to the fire district. They're stating that's not part of basic ed. So that doesn't mean we won't have to pay it. It just means that we have to find some other way to pay it. And then other than that, there was 2 grants that we receive. It's TPEP that has a lot to do with teacher principal, like evaluations. Yeah. And then BEST, which is sort of almost a mentoring grant for new teachers. So those are the 2 that they've stated that they don't feel is basic ed. So we could technically lose those. And with losing those, we lose the $60,000 that technically in the past we've been spending on professional development. Now, we're sort of fortunate as a district in this situation because there's a lot of districts around us that were receiving local effort assistance, LEA, and they've decided that LEA is not considered basic ed. Some districts, some larger districts, much larger districts, received millions of dollars in LEA, and that's now potentially on the table to be cut. And those districts are going to have to find a way to recoup those expenses. We would have loved to have been receiving LEA in the past. Unfortunately, we haven't.
Yeah, we've only had 1 year that we did, and that was the year before this, and it was like $18,000. It was not a huge amount.
Nope. So we don't have to worry about losing anything on that side. What I can say is that the state is telling us to brace for upwards of 15% revenue take back come January, but that 15% is being averaged.
So some districts are going to be much higher than that. Some districts are going to be lower than that. I feel like our district is going to be lower than that, seeing as how they are not really giving us anything extra based upon the list that they have given us themselves. We're not getting that funding that's on the table to be cut.
Right,
The
but I
only
guess
thing-
if it comes to special education, I mean, that's kind of the hot button, but if there's a service required and we literally cannot write a check for that service, how we've had contracts in the past and so on and so forth, is the school district going to be on the hook of a potential lawsuit versus the state?
We would have to, yeah, we would have to cut services to basic ed kids to provide that service.
Yeah.
Rob
We could
Peters
be
pay
held
Paul.
liable.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Mhm. Okay, so that's it for my presentation, unless you guys have any other questions regarding this.
Anybody have any other questions for Ashley?
I don't have a question. It's more of a statement. And Leanna, this is going to be probably up on your radar as the new legislative rep, but because I had a notification today from our legislative committee representative, Jim Stoffer from SQUIM, that we're probably going to have to be fighting and clawing for any of the timber revenue.
Yeah.
And potential changes that in the past where they've taken money that we've gotten in regards, so it was kind of a net zero gain to that where we actually last year, actually, we actually got to keep that money.
We did.
That's on the table, I guess, now to be taken away again. I don't know if that falls under LEA or not, but I don't think so because it was a pretty large chunk of money we got.
Yeah,
It
they
was
just
$1 million.
don't
2 years
include
ago.
it. They just don't include it in our, like, their prediction that they did because it's not something that we get every year. It depends on timber sales.
Anybody
Thanks.
have anything else? Ashley, I would just like to thank you for all your hard work. I know this has not been easy this year, and you have done a wonderful job of keeping us on track and keeping your finger on all those revenues and expenditures. So I appreciate your hard work.
I thank you.
If we had a medal for exceptional accounting, I think it would go to Ashley.
Agreed. Now we are at teaching and learning update. Dana.
Yeah, so first, I just wanted to announce that we received notice this month that we are consolidated program review submissions have been accepted. We've completed the review, and that looks at our federal funded programs under ESEA that we do every 5 or 6 years. That we've completed that review successfully. We were commended on many of the areas that we worked on. And so I'm very proud of our staff at the building level and district level for their work in support of kids. That is really awesome.
All
Hannah,
right.
can I say one thing?
Yes.
One of our little accommodations that we received was on the financial side. So
Yes.
I just want to throw
Hey.
that out there.
That does not surprise me.
Yes, it was. And so we're very proud of that work. And it shows how hard that our staff is focusing on meeting the requirements to meet the needs of kids in our district.
For sure.
Second, Jackie, do you have that one-page document loaded that I was able to add to the packet today?
Yep, I'm gonna open it right now.
As you know, over the last 2 years, we've engaged with our district school leaders and district leaders on some professional development training to support us in better supporting our buildings as we develop comprehensive systems to support kids throughout the district and meeting their learning needs. And we're completing the 2-year process this year. Although the other document, the one-pager. This year, although the WASLA program that we participated in, the Washington School Leadership Academy, is not designed to include assistant principals. We insisted that our assistant principals be able to participate as part of the program because we felt that to build a powerful leadership team, we needed the whole team there. And so WASLA gave us that opportunity to include everybody. And at the end of the 2-year participation in the process, normally at the summer conference that happens in Spokane, each team has to present their work and get feedback from other teams who have participated from throughout the state. That's not happening in person this year like anything else. And next week we will be presenting our work to our colleagues in a Zoom meeting. But I did want you to get a preview of this document, and we are going to find many ways to share this, because on one page, this celebrates all of the change that we've made as we've developed systems for kids in our district. And it starts in the center with, what's called a wordle. With that is where we took all those piles of words came from looking at the belief statements that we've developed with our building leadership teams to guide our work going forward. You put those into this computer program, and we take out things like and the, and then it makes a little visual for you of the words, and the ones that you use the most show up the biggest. So in the middle, that's a way to graphically represent all the many sentences in belief statements that our buildings developed in doing this work. And then coming into this program, we had to develop a problem of practice and solve that problem of practice in the work that we did. So our problem was that we believed that by developing effective multi-tiered systems of support to enhance the learning of our kids throughout the district, that would happen. Our kids would be more successful across all subgroups, in all grade levels, in all buildings. And so out of that work came all of this braided work that we're doing, which is why on the document you see a braid holding it all together. We're trying to be very visual here. So, it starts with shared leadership. So we moved some of the leadership away from just cabinet and principals, and we included building leadership teams and committees at the district levels supporting the development of MTSS. And so shared leadership is one piece of that. Adopting a single problem-solving model to address data, looking at data and figuring out what we need to do for kids across the district is part of that work. Enhancing and continuing to grow our family and community partnerships. Taking an approach to student learning that we have a layered continuum of support. We're not talking about the triangle that people have talked about with for years and years, because we found the triangle isn't really what we were doing. We're layering how we support. Everybody should get one level of instruction that everybody gets. And if we're doing a really good job, 80% of our kids will be successful with that first level. And then we're going to have to ramp it up a little bit for tier 2 for some more kids. And then that should get us another 15% as we get better and better at this, so that finally the kids at tier 3, that's 5% of the kids that need the most intensive supports. And that's what we're working towards. And then we're using evidence-based, all our practices are evidence-based. So we're using data to support the work that we're doing. Then if you kind of go down again with that a little bit, the other way, Jackie. Yeah, up, I guess. You see that, remember the work at the start of this that we involved different community groups in telling us what are the 3 things you expect to see in our schools every day. And we started with the 3 pillars, of respect and kindness and responsible. I knew it was another R. But as we work through this process, we've realized that all of this is built on a foundation of kids feeling safe, socially, emotionally, as well as physically at school. So our 3 pillars have become a building built on a foundation of safety. And then all of this contributes to the blueprints that we have as a district and as each school that share our commitments to what we're going to do to ensure in a multi-tiered system of support, our kids get what they need for success. So this is the work that we're going to present next week. And I just wanted you to have a preview of this summary of that.
Excellent.
All right, Jackie, now we can pull up the next year planning PowerPoint. So we can start right there. We don't have to start with the title slide. We've been through a lot in the last 12 weeks, and we've learned a lot about what works and doesn't work for kids and in our district and how we can best support them. And so we know that as we plan for fall, that we have learned that we have to answer some questions. For most importantly, how can we plan for supporting our students who may have learning gaps and or experience trauma either during this time period or previously, and this instant transition to remote learning has had an additional deleterious effect on them. So we're going to have to really focus on how we make up for those gaps. And not only, we've had some kids that have thrived in this environment, and we have kids that we didn't necessarily think would thrive in this environment that have, but we have other kids for whom it's been extremely difficult and even traumatic. So we're not just planning for an opening in the fall, we're planning for an opening that gives kids a chance of success next year, but also an opportunity to fill any gaps that they are having as a result of the really very difficult spring that we all have been through. Next slide, Jackie. We've talked to all sorts of different stakeholder groups. We have now had multiple Zoom forums held with teachers. We have had a Zoom forum with classified staff. We have had a Zoom forum and online surveys and phone call surveys with parents across the district. And what we know now about effective remote instruction that promotes student learning is represented on this slide. We know that we have to have multiple modalities because connectivity remains an issue. Wherever possible, students do better when they have choice about how they're going to learn. That our students need to see and hear their classmates, and they need to have their social, emotional needs met to be effective learners. And that we can use short pre-recorded videos that are what we can now call asynchronous instruction embedded in other kinds of online instruction like a Zoom meeting to best support our kids. Next. When we asked staff and parents about how this spring went, I have to say, overall, the response was very appreciative of the work that our staff has done, very supportive and understanding of how difficult this is. We did identify problem areas. And when we asked our staff first, what was very interesting, when we asked our parents, the answers were exactly the same. So our staff really was in tune with the needs of our families as we move through this. So we know that connectivity to technology needs to be consistent, and that is an issue in our community. That two-way communication with parents and staff and students needs to be consistent, and it needs to be simplified. We had way too many different platforms that people were using, at least initially. And as we've moved forward, we've included some additional training for staff and a new way of looking at how we do that. So the tools that we're going to use are going to be represented in a document you'll start seeing pretty soon that talks about our core four. So, you know, our learning management system is going to be the Microsoft Teams system. It's not going to be some people using Canvas and some people using Google and some people using Teams, but Teams will be our central learning management system. And then for other different tools, we have identified tools that are going to be the ones we expect our staff and families to use so that we can train the families on the ones they need to know, and they don't have to try to figure out a zillion different ways to engage with learning with their students. So we need training for students, staff, and families, and students as well as families and staff identified that the hardest thing to do in continuous learning or remote learning is to maintain their own motivation as a student to keep checking in and keep logging on. So as we gathered all this information, then we had a parent forum, and on the next slide, that kind of shows you the things that we asked, the areas we asked parents to respond to. Can you move to that next slide, Jackie? And so we had just over 30 people participate in our parent Zoom forum, but I have almost 40 written responses additional from parents and students about the questions that we asked at this forum. So that was very helpful. In addition, we were trying to find the very best way to make sure that we connected with our EL parents, because our English learner parents have and families have some very different additional challenges to learning in this way. And so we put together the same materials we did in English. We were getting prepared to do an online Zoom, And then we realized that that really wasn't going to work. So we have actually had staff call and collect data from every single English learner family to add to the data that we have about what worked and what didn't this spring to help us plan going into the fall. Next slide. So we committed to our families that what we need to know from you, and we're going to keep asking, is as we plan for a fall reopening, what do you need from us to be successful? And we'll keep asking that as we know more and more about what that might look like so they can better respond to what they'll need to be successful in that environment. Next. So we're kind of ending up spring here. We've been engaging with staff and families and students. We're now at the point where we're having to come up with a plan for next fall. We're preparing our facilities. We're getting ready. We're figuring out how we're going to solve the problem of PPE. We're figuring out that as we read the guidance that was released on Thursday last from OSPI, there's some really strict rules and guidelines that we're going to have to follow, including screening for kids and staff members every day when they come to school. And how are we going to do that? And so that we're going to get all of this plan together and bring a very serious drafted plan to you at the July meeting. It does need to be approved by the board, and it does need to go through a process with the county health officials as well. But the board needs to approve it at the very latest 2 weeks prior to the beginning of the school year. So we are working really hard to have a comprehensive plan available for the July meeting that you will be able to approve, knowing that we might have to make tweaks as things change with the COVID environment in the state. So then in late summer, we will have to provide specific professional development for our staff, but also for our parents in many cases to be successful in our school opening for fall of 2020. Next. In our path to reopening, we are considering these 4 areas as guiding, as initial things that we have to do. We have to follow the public health guidelines. As was released in the guidance from OSPI last week, there are guiding rules that we have to follow that OSPI set. There are guidelines that we have to follow from the Department of Health at the state level. There are guidelines that we have to follow from Labor and Industries at the state level. And in addition, our county health officers may impose stricter requirements on us. They may not make it easier than the state Department of Health says, but they can impose additional guidelines. And for us, that is complicated by the fact that we have 2 county health departments that we have to work with. All while we're doing this and figuring out what the year is going to look like next year, we have to we're going to maintain our focus on an inclusive, positive learning environment, continuing to build multi-tiered systems of support to get our kids through school. We will establish systematic protocols, and those protocols will address things like what happens when somebody is identified. How do we engage with the county health departments in contact tracing? How do we engage with the county health department in determining who has to be asked to quarantine? So there's a lot of work to do there. And then most importantly, timely and transparent communication with our stakeholders and community and our families and our kids. Next. So as we do all of this, we're kind of putting the planning into 6 buckets, and we're stealing this. This is really good work that the school district in Palo Alto did, and they really developed some good guiding questions that help us make sure we've thought of everything we need to do as we develop these plans. So we will have people looking at instruction. We will have people making sure we planned everything we need to do around wellness, technology, facilities, operations, and governance. And when we come to governance, we're talking about things about like coordinating our services, communication, ensuring equity, and access for all. So all of these things will be part of the plan that we bring to you in July. Next. As we look towards fall, the guidance was very clear. And unfortunately, the presentation focused on the positive, and I get why the state superintendent would want to do that. What was said to our public was that school will reopen in the fall, and school will reopen in the fall. What isn't as clear is what that's going to look like. Because as school reopens in the fall, we have to do that by following all the public health guidelines. That means right now, at the bare minimum, we will have daily screening that we have to do. And there are different ways we are looking at that. There are many people, of course, producing, because people take advantage of opportunities. There are apps being produced that are called Attestation Apps. So if we were to use an app like that, instead of having to take every kid's temperature every day and ask them all the 5 questions as they come to school or get on the bus or whatever we determine it would probably be as they come into the school building. At home, the parent can say, they can look at the app and they can go on and say, I took my kid's temperature, it was under 100.4. No, nobody in the family's been sick, nobody's been died. They can answer all the questions and we can take that attestation as the screening piece for those kids. Kids and staff will be required in most cases to wear cloth face coverings. There will be some exceptions in very specific, for very specific children primarily, and maybe some staff, but overall the requirement will be cloth face coverings. So schools will have an opportunity to reopen, but it won't look like we've always thought school might look. We also have to follow social distancing, and that is very firm, 6 feet of space around each child. So for example, at the high school yesterday, they picked a class, or 2 days ago now, they picked a classroom and took some measuring tapes and started in the center of the room with the kids that would be sitting in the center and measured it out. And we can get 12 kids at a time in a classroom at the high school.
Wow.
So what that means is that opening with no restrictions is not going to happen. Okay. Not in the fall. Hopefully we get to there, but right now we're being told not to plan on that. So we are being told we need to plan a way to get all kids to school, as in school, face to face as much as we can. And we agree that that's important for our kids and our families. So we're working on that. We also have to have a plan to be prepared if the counties or state health department shuts us down and tells us the situation has changed and you need to go back to all remote learning. So those are things we are preparing for that. In as far as all kids getting to be in school as much as possible. So since we don't have space to do the 6 feet, we're going to get creative and we're going to see what that looks like. We're looking at, are there groups of kids that it's the highest priority that are at school the most? For example, an argument can be made for your youngest children or your children with IEPs or your children who don't have connectivity at home. There are all sorts of different subgroups of kids that we will make priorities as we plan. But we'll be looking at how all kids get to be at school some of the time, but probably not all kids are at school at the same time as we plan for next year. And those hybrid models include things like AB schedules, one group come one day, the next group the next day, or 1 week and the next week, or splitting the day in morning and afternoon sessions, or have, and as we look at it, and as we look at the needs of our kids and we look at how things went this spring, we believe that probably what we will be presenting to the board is at each level some choices for families. Because, the state is for example, the state is making a requirement about masks. And some families feel really strongly about whether they want their children to do that or to be in that environment. So we will want to have an option that allows kids to continue learning remotely if that is a no-go for them as far as coming back into the school building. So we have a lot of work to do between now and the July board meeting to come to you with an effective plan, but we're working on it really hard. We're going to continue to gather input from as many different people as we can so that we can bring you a well-vetted recommendation to discuss when we come together in July.
Where are they going to get, are we going to supply masks, or are they supposed to bring those?
Well, we're going to supply some. you know, it's different for staff and students. If we require staff to wear masks, and we will have to require staff to wear masks under the LNI requirements and State Department of Health, then we will supply them. We have ordered fabric masks for every staff member. We also have ordered and received as donations a significant quantity to start with of disposable masks. It won't be enough to get us through for very long. It's going to be a big expense and an ongoing expense next year. And thank goodness we applied with FEMA, because we can submit those costs, right, Ashley? And but
Yes, we will be able to submit those, but we are potentially looking at about an expense of $40,000 a month for disposable masks alone.
Goodness.
Oh, my goodness.
yeah, so anyway, yeah, we will supply them. They will probably be on the back to school supply list for kids, but we will also have plenty of disposable masks in the building, so that not having a mask is not a problem, that we will have masks available to keep everybody safe. But we do know that the idea of wearing a mask is abhorrent because it's scary, or the student's disability might interfere with them being able to comprehend why all these people have these things on their faces. There are a lot of different reasons. There are families that just don't want their kids wearing masks and don't want them in that environment. So we're going to try to build a plan that accommodates all of our kids with positive learning environments. We're going to, and this is the last slide, the 4 areas that we have to make sure that all kids get are social emotional support, an opportunity to get and stay engaged, high quality instruction, and that they're learning rigorous work and we're assessing it and able to report effectively on it. So this spring, for example, we were allowed a one-time only exception to the grading policy. That's over. We revert to our traditional grading policy in the fall unless we decide to develop a completely new one as a district. So that's where we are. There's a lot of work to do. We hope to have a big chunk of it done before the end of this month and have a really solid report to you in July so that we can take a vote then and then be tweaking things as we come back together in August to get ready for our start of the year. One of the things we might be considering that's starting to come up through information that we're getting about the science of the virus from the state, and as other districts start to consider what next year looks like, we keep being told it might be a good idea to consider your school calendar. So we may look at that as part of the recommendation. For example, there are districts in our state that are very concerned about spikes in the virus, that are considering that viruses like this tend to spike the greatest during the winter months. So would it be worthwhile to consider changing your calendar to a significant degree, maybe to consider ending for us the fall term at the end of the first trimester, taking a longer winter break through the holidays and coming back later in January, so that, and then ending later in June, so that we have less time where kids are in school exposing each other to potential virus. So those are all things that we don't have a decision on now, so I hope nobody gets stressed out, but they're all things that we're going to consider before we bring a report to the board in July.
Goodness sakes, what a report.
Wow, that's a lot of work and a lot of thought, and I'm looking forward to what you bring to us in July. I mean, this is incredible. It's so difficult to even try and comprehend how much went into just what that presentation and how many people were involved in that. So thank you, Dana, and thank your team as well. Yes.
Here, here, indeed.
So capital projects, anything on that?
Well, I think Ashley stole all the thunder on that a little bit earlier. The softball field is almost done. The stadium is effectively ready to go. There are a couple little cosmetic things we're going to do, I think, before we get to fall season, but all the things we said were going to be done are done. Portable's close, and the roof's on at Sand Hill. So we're very excited about all of those things.
We don't know what fall season will be looking like though at this point, correct?
We do not. At this point, the only guidance that has been released for athletics is specific to community-based athletics. And basically you need to follow the guidelines for the phase that you're in. So currently as in phase 2, community teams or our teams, because our teams can right now follow those guidelines for practice, would have to follow that social distancing rule, wearing masks, and having kids no more than 5 people gathered at a time doing any kind of practice activities. Now, Mason County has applied for phase 3. They're hoping to hear by early next week, if not sooner, that we have been accepted for phase 3. At that point, if they're at phase 3, the social distancing rules still apply, but they can now have 50 people at that practice following all of those guidelines. So that makes conditioning, summer conditioning at least, very possible. You know, in the case of thinking about football practice or something, having tackling drills might be a little bit difficult following those rules, but that's not necessarily something that they're doing in summer conditioning as well. We do have indications that by the second week in July, WIAA, the sports governing body, OSPI, and the State Department of Health will have come to some agreements about fall sports, and they'll tell us what those are. So we're looking forward to hearing those, because we know our kids and our families and our coaches are raring to go and excited to bring some normal back with fall athletics and band and other activities.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Laura, can I just say one thing about the capital projects in case we have anybody viewing who hasn't viewed a meeting recently? I just want to make sure that it's clear that all the capital projects we were discussing are being funded through the Capital Projects Fund. This is separate from the general fund. The Capital Projects Fund can only pay for capital projects. It can't be transferred into the general fund, and we can't pay salaries with it or buy supplies with it or anything like that. So the money in that fund is being used for its specific intended purpose, and those are the only things we can spend that money on.
Okay, thank you for that, Ashley. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Our upcoming board letter columnists, we have Art for June.
Right.
Craig is in July. John, you have August. And Leanna, you have September.
I think, Art, if you and I can touch base in the next couple days, we can do something around the planning that's going together for fall. And then, you know, as we hit July, maybe you guys will be able to write about the report you get.
Thanks.
Okay, now we're at assurance of organizational performance and policy review. The monitoring report this month is for school engagement. I would like to ask you, Dana, to just quickly recap your monitoring report.
Yeah, it was a different one to write this month because there were a lot of things I didn't get to report on. I didn't report on things like how many kids were involved in athletics and stuff because we had a shortened year. But I did want to highlight that the strong efforts that our staff and our students made to continue school engagement throughout the year. So I kind of focused on that a little bit more. You know, we have things like the online choir concert that Mr. Drury put together, all sorts of different kinds of lessons that kids and teachers were involved in electronically. Our work from, like, for example, our shop teacher, making sure projects went home that kids could do. I think engagement was really different in the last third of the year than it has been traditionally. But I did want to highlight that people took that challenge seriously and worked really hard to find ways to keep kids engaged at North Mason while the world changed rapidly around us.
Okay. All right, thank you. Now we're going to need a motion to approve that, or to move that the superintendent is in compliance with monitoring report school engagement.
Madam Chairman,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Art, you had your hand up.
Yes, I would like to move that we find the superintendent's performance to be compliant with the guidelines for E4.
Thank you. Are there any comments just a weird year and good job. That's all I can say. But thank you, and I appreciate the effort that everyone has made to continue school engagement and connect with our students and keep that ball moving. All right, we have a motion. Any other discussion? Leanna? Aye.
No discussion. Aye.
John?
Oh, aye, yeah.
Art?
Aye.
And I say aye. I think Craig got called out at the fire district, so he has left us. So the motion passes. Next, we have GPO8 agenda planning and annual board agenda that was on the agenda last month, and we had approved those. Is there any further discussion about either of those? Nope.
In here,
Okay, we're at the adjournment section, the good of the order, board and superintendent. I would like to just take this opportunity to thank Denise Nesham for all of her work, her support, and her quiet, steady manner. Being the executive assistant to the superintendent these last, how long, 7 or 8 years. She's been a force for us. She's always available. She is always fixing our errors and help us. Denise, and in addition, I'd like to welcome. I'm getting a little feedback here, so I don't know. I'd also like to welcome Jackie Young, who is replacing Denise. She will now be our workhorse and be support as executive assistant. So thank you so much, Denise, for all your hard work. Anybody else have any comments for the good of the order?
Yes, I wanted to say thank you as well to Denise and to welcome Jackie. She's local, like Grapeview local. We grew up together with her brother, and so she's giving back to the community. That's very awesome. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to just thank Denise. Again, she's been very patient with my various problems with technology and other things as well. So I think, again, she deserves some kind of recognition for above and beyond the call of duty. And I do want to say to Dana and the whole team, this is historically a very significant quarter, a very significant part of the year that we've just gone through. I mean, this is a complete change in how we do business. And I think the ability to operate well under such extreme pressure is an additional measure of excellent leadership and people that are also dedicated to doing the common good. So I commend Dana and her staff for something I think is really exceptional. And that is an adjustment on the turning on a dime to an entire different model of education. And I've just been amazed at the ability of our district to do that.
Thank you, Dean. Okay, any other comments? Now we are at the board self-assessment of the meeting. This is the board's opportunity to evaluate their performance during meetings. It is our governance policy for E2, and basically the general meeting behavior has a variety of items that are attached to that in terms of agenda and preparation, deliberations, participation, and I have given us a satisfactory in those areas. Under governance principles review, I've also said that we have followed those principles, and there are 10 of them, and these will be posted, I believe, on the website if anyone is interested. So our overall is a satisfactory. Our next board meeting date is July 16th at 6:30, and it may be in the boardroom and it might be remote. So hopefully we will be able to meet in the boardroom and people will be able to come, and that would be a wonderful thing. So if there's nothing else, I will adjourn the meeting. I'm going to ask the school board to check with Jackie for a time to come by and sign all of the documents that we have here that need your signature. So please contact her and make arrangements to do that. Thank you, everybody, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.